Today, we're diving into a book called Virtuous Atheism, and it puts forward a really provocative idea. It argues that atheism isn't just a passive thing, like a blank space where belief should be. Instead, it's an active moral framework, one that's built on a radical commitment to truth.
You've seen this phrase all over the internet, right? Atheism is just a lack of belief. And, it sounds clever. It kind of frames atheism as this simple, empty position, something that doesn't really need a defense because, hey, there's nothing there to defend.
But what if that popular slogan isn't just a little bit off, but totally and fundamentally wrong? What if, as this book claims, it completely erases the ethical and intellectual heart of what it actually means to be an atheist? And that brings us to the book's first major argument. That real atheism isn't some passive state you can just be born into. No, it's an active, considered judgment that you have to make about the world.
So, here's the book's core definition. See, it's not the simple ignorance of a newborn baby who just doesn't know any better. It's an active disbelief, a conclusion you reach only after you've looked at the claims, examined the evidence, and found that evidence to be, well, missing.
I mean, the difference here is night and day. On one side, you've got this passive state that takes zero thought. On the other, you have a reasoned judgment that, as the author argues, is deeply connected to an ethic of honesty. One is just a blank space, the other is a verdict.
Okay, now this is where the whole thing gets really interesting. The book argues there's a moral framework hidden in plain sight. It's right there in the very language atheists use to make their case.
Just think about it for a second. When someone says you ought to follow the evidence, or that we should not believe things without proof, they're not just stating a fact, are they? They're making a judgment call about how we should behave. They're talking about what's right and what's wrong.
So to really get this, we need to see the difference between two kinds of language. Descriptive language just says how the world is. The sky is cloudy. Simple. But normative language, that makes a claim about how the world ought to be. And the book's point is that atheist reasoning is just packed with these ought statements.
So here's how the logic breaks down. You start with a fact. There's no reliable evidence for religious claims. Then you add a value, a normative statement. We ought not believe things without evidence. And what's the result? A moral conclusion. Therefore, we ought not accept those religious claims. See? It's a straight-up moral argument.
And all of this is building up to the book's central, most powerful claim, that for an atheist to be consistent, truth itself has to become their supreme moral principle, the guide for everything.
This is really all about intellectual honesty. Think about it. If you're going to demand hard evidence before rejecting religion, then to be consistent, you have to apply that exact same demanding standard to, well, everything else in your life.
And that means your commitment to truth can't just stop when you're talking about religion. It has to bleed into your politics, your personal relationships, how you deal with justice in the world. Otherwise, the book argues, it's not a principle at all. It's just a convenient, selective standard.
So, what's the alternative? The book then explores what happens when we choose to value our own emotional comfort over facing difficult, inconvenient truths. The author gives this a name, self-deception. It's that moment when you have a nagging suspicion that something isn't true, but you choose to believe it anyway because it just feels better. And the book claims this isn't just a simple mistake in logic. It's a moral failure.
To make this concrete, the book brings up a powerful, real-world example where a very comforting belief has been put to the scientific test: intercessory prayer. Praying for someone who is sick. Does it actually work?
Well, the scientific answer is a pretty unambiguous zero. The source points to huge, controlled studies like the decade-long STEP project and a whole bunch of meta-analyses, and they all found no scientifically measurable effect of intercessory prayer on health. The comfort might be real, sure, but the effect just isn't there.
And this is where the real cost becomes devastatingly clear. The book calls this the social cost of shared illusions, and it cites these tragic, real-life cases of parents who chose prayer over proven medicine, which led to the completely preventable deaths of their own children.
So, that brings us to the final part of this argument. It's about moving beyond simply being against religion, because, as the book contends, that's just not enough to build a meaningful, ethical life.
And this is a really crucial point. Just being factually right about one big thing, like whether gods exist, that doesn't automatically make you a good or virtuous person. The book argues that atheism has to offer a positive vision for how to live, not just a negative list of things you reject.
And this is the key difference, isn't it? Criticism tears things down.
A positive ethic builds something new. It's about moving past just exposing what's false and starting to construct a life based on what's true, building a brand new moral structure on the solid foundation of reality.
And so we end where the book really begins. It isn't asking if a society full of atheists can be moral. It's asking a much tougher, much more personal question. If you truly, honestly commit to truth as your highest moral guide, what kind of person does that demand you become?